overview of some of the information security assurance services our business unit offers within SGS. As you can see on this slide, we're focusing our portfolio on 4 pillars, which in our opinion represent key trends of cyber risk every company is facing today. As mentioned at the beginning, this webinar is actually part of a series of 4 webinars that have been organized around these 4 topics. I'll skip the first pillar since this is the topic for today, cloud security. But if we look at the second pillar, information security, we're addressing the management and protection measures businesses need to put in place within their own IT to better manage both the external and internal cyber risks. These risks are growing in numbers by the day, as we see in the news almost daily now, a continuous flow of evidence of the existence of a major problem companies must address as a top priority. The next pillar, data privacy, was covered in our first webinar earlier this year. It's another topic we see developing rapidly throughout the world as governments put in place regulations to protect the personal data and the handling of personal data of their citizens. Finally, service availability, which we described in our last webinar as a combination of business continuity but also service management. I invite you to check on our website if you'd like to listen to a replay of these past webinars. Looking at the slide and without getting into too many details, you can see that there are a number of standards applicable to these 4 areas, and this is where our SGS team is really invested to support its clients in managing this risk. On our agenda today, we will begin by setting some context and going over the massive trend we observe in the world, accelerated by the COVID crisis, and that is the move to the cloud, whether it is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service, a clear sign of the acceleration of the digitalization in the enterprise. And while this move has been extremely beneficial to businesses, especially given the COVID impact, it has often been done in a rush with little consideration to inherent risks. So as we seem to see now the end of the tunnel for this crisis, we think it is important to take a step back and assess these risks and the opportunity if we address them properly. During this webinar, we will present a concrete case study. We will also offer some tools and guidance to you on how to start looking at cloud security from a holistic point of view. And so without any more delays, I'd like to hand over to Nicholas and Richard to take us deeper into this important topic.
Okay, hi everyone, and thanks for being here today. And thank you, Aymeric, for the introductions. My name is Nicholas Donchetta, and I will be talking a bit about the cloud, why you should be interested and what the risks are, and how to address those risks. So let's get started. It's my belief, and I think this belief is shared by many in the industry, that in the future every company will be an IT company. And you can see this as mentioned by the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, that it already is the case, that every company is a software company, and that if you're not yet there, it's time to think about how to digitalize your operations. Cloud computing is in the forefront of this movement, and it builds the basis of much of the growth in the IT sector. Cloud computing connects people, connects data, it connects processes in new ways, and helps bring them together. Value is created through this aggregation, and through the benefits of digitalization of processes in the cloud, it will support businesses in optimizing their operations and engaging with customers and employees. I will talk a bit about some of the benefits on the next slide and give you an overview of what to expect regarding the risks that result from a move to the cloud. An interesting fact is that growth in cloud computing is outpacing most IT services and products and is estimated to be about 18% per year. I think that some of the benefits of the cloud have become very clear to most people over the last year or so, where we could see how aspects of the cloud, such as agility and service reliability, really helped businesses react to the COVID crisis. Benefits of working in the cloud can be split into 4 categories: cost, agility, service quality, and new scenarios. Costs in the cloud have quite a few positive aspects. clear and transparent cost structures, and the ability to scale to demand with just the right amount. Costs can, however, also be a double-edged sword, as the costs need to be continuously monitored and kept in control. The most obvious benefits to cloud computing come from its agility and the capabilities to provide higher service quality, such as performance, scalability, and reliability. Against common misconceptions, security can also be a benefit of the cloud. Big cloud providers as Amazon, Google, Microsoft have immense security budgets and are capable of hiring the best people and implementing the best technologies. And they achieve the highest expectations that security standards can provide. Modern applications of the cloud allow for ease of access, ease of developing new features, and very importantly, instant provisioning. Which means once you have developed, let's say, an application, you can immediately throw it into the cloud and launch the product. Now, if you think about what this would take with traditional on-site hosting, you will realize how much of a benefit this is. You can already imagine the costs and effort involved in setting up on-site servers with all the infrastructure behind it and everything you would need to have your service run 24/7 with 99% availability. And on top of it all, think about how to secure your infrastructure, and even worse, implement all the security measures to keep your application secure. Since we live in the times we're in, I have to briefly mention how the COVID crisis has impacted IT operations and IT trends in the business world. We can see the market steadily shift towards cloud adoption, and I have to agree with this analysis by Gartner that this shift will continue to accelerate going forward. As the numbers show, the market share of cloud versus on-site hosting is increasing dramatically, and this will continue to be the case in the next few years. Time may come in the future where a trend reversal might take place, but this is nowhere in sight. So, what have we learned in the last year or so? One example is scaling of infrastructure, such as network and work-related applications, was one of the primary factors in a speedy recovery. Companies who worked with cloud infrastructure adapted to the immediate and enforced home office requirements relatively quickly, while companies with on-site infrastructure struggled for days or even for weeks to get their infrastructure up to shape to handle the influx of connections and the changes to the workflows. Working in the cloud provided companies with the ability to scale rapidly and to adapt to the required performance of the infrastructure for the sudden shift to home office. Increased capacity requirements were easily met by those working largely within the cloud. The COVID crisis, I think, was real proof of how the cloud can support in achieving business continuity during a pandemic. As a business continuity professional, I would expect companies to have had plans in place of how to react to a pandemic. But in reality, I believe most companies were unprepared for it, even if they had plans in place. In the end, I think plans never really stand up to what reality brings. With the move to predominantly home office, new risks were introduced. We saw a dramatic rise in ransomware attacks, in social engineering, and attacks on company endpoints such as laptops or mobile phones. And we saw a dramatic rise in successful attacks due to the general unpreparedness of the companies and to the perception of security in people's own homes. Now to get to the interesting part, cloud security. To understand how security in the cloud works, first we should understand the cloud service model and how the different models affect responsibility for security. And even though when you get into the detail, there are more models in our list here, this is the commonly accepted basis, where we can find the 4 layers of responsibility: infrastructure, platform, software, and user. Infrastructure as a service provides the physical infrastructure. This means physical cables, the hardware, the data centers, and everything within it. Platform as a service is already a bit more abstract, as here we are talking about hosting of development and deployment environments in the cloud. This can mean everything from virtual private clouds, where the user accesses the device at an operating system level, such as, for example, the cloud instances you would find on Google Cloud or AWS. Or we can talk about the hosted development platforms where a third-party provider provides access for example, web development and web hosting services. Software as a service is more straightforward and quite well known. Most people who use a computer or their smartphone have some familiarity with this model, as most web apps can be considered software as a service. I think one common example everyone will know would be Microsoft Office 365 or services such as Salesforce, for example. For each model, the service owner is responsible for the layer they operate in. For infrastructure as a service, this is, for example, just the hardware and the connectivity. And even though this will often include services such as automated backups, firewalls, and others, the responsibility lies with the provider only to a certain point. And that is usually the hardware operating system layer. And services as firewalls and backups, while sometimes included, are often offered as services that can be purchased additionally. Similarly, platform as a service will only be responsible for security up to a layer specified in the service agreements, which means vulnerabilities in software, for example, will often be excluded from the responsibility. In software as a service, the responsibility for everything, including the software vulnerabilities, is in the hands of the provider, and only security measures such as identity and access management or awareness trainings will be in the domain of the user. When considering the security posture of your cloud environment, it is therefore important to adequately understand where your responsibility starts and where it ends. Generally, we can look at several arguments to hand over more responsibilities to cloud provider. For example, making use of software as a service to reduce responsibility, or we can present several arguments to the contrary, where we want to keep as much responsibility as possible and only purchase services at an infrastructure level. As arguments in favor of decreasing your own responsibility, we can analyze factors such as economies of scale. Do we have the budget available to set up an effective security team? Do we have budget and resources available to purchase and operate the necessary software? Can we effectively introduce the necessary processes? What do our clients expect from us? As counter-arguments, it is necessary to understand how outsourcing responsibility will also create a loss of control over security. Big cloud providers will generally not allow client audits and will provide certificates, such as ISO 27001, to prove their own compliance with security guidelines. This creates a situation where you need to be sure you can trust the cloud provider and the certification bodies, as there are many aspects of the security posture of the cloud provider which will remain unknown to the user. Different cloud models also introduce different risks. To accurately describe the risk of cloud implementations, we need to further divide the cloud models to include implementations such as private clouds, community clouds, and public clouds. A private cloud can be outsourced to cloud provider or be made available through internal resources, but is available only to your organization. A community cloud is a private cloud that is shared between different entities, where each entity has a certain level of control over the cloud implementation itself. Public clouds are services available to, as the name states, the public. These are the most common implementations and what can usually be seen with the large cloud service providers when servers are shared between tenants. This is something you would see in AWS or Microsoft Azure. A hybrid cloud is a mixture of public and a private. That means some aspects remain with the public cloud provider and others with the private sphere. As I mentioned earlier, different implementations bring different risks. There are some risks such as social engineering, man-in-the-middle attacks, or supply chain attacks, just to name a few, which are really always applicable, while others, such as theft, for example, apply only to the physical layer, so to the infrastructure level, or software vulnerabilities, which apply to the application or operating system layer, and are therefore avoidable to your responsibility if you're using a software as a service. This is a very complex topic and can be a webinar in itself. So I think in the interest of brevity, I will not go into all of the risks. So if you have any specific questions to any of them, please feel free to contact me and I will be happy to have a chat with you. Another aspect of risk that I haven't really touched upon is privacy. As you probably know, privacy has become increasingly important on the regulatory front due to legislations like GDPR. All major risks in regards to privacy in the cloud can be adequately addressed. Data loss or data breaches where data is exposed or leaked to the public, regulatory risks where compliance with legislature is not met, conflicting regulations where companies do business in very different privacy environments at the same time, such as, for example, the United States and Europe, where regulations can cause conflict in their overlap, or an information bleed where data is exposed to the public due to misconfigurations or faulty programming. These risks can all be addressed if they are identified, and the assessment is applied to a real-life situation of your cloud implementation. We can split the security measures to address these privacy risks into four main categories: encryption, anonymization, data loss prevention, and security information and event management. Encryption is probably the most important aspect in securing information in the cloud, as it addresses much of the risk of exposing information to the internet. And as we know, in order for information to go back and forth between your computer and the cloud, it has to go through the internet. This is where we apply something called encryption of data in transit, and most of you will be familiar with this, as this is one of the primary functions of a virtual private network, or VPN. For encryption to be secure, however, we also need to make sure the keys to decrypt the information are secured, because anyone who has access to keys can access the encrypted information as well. Protecting data at rest through encryption is a sensitive topic in cloud security, because encrypting whole data drives can be quite resource intensive, as the processes have to work overtime to constantly encrypt and decrypt. So this is where we need to have an excellent data classification in place to understand where and when to apply encryption for data at rest, or the resource cost and therefore the financial cost would drastically increase to increase security. Anonymization is also a very extensive topic, so in the interest of time, I will only touch on it briefly. But it's an important factor in data privacy in the cloud. Generally speaking, if the personal data you are sending into the cloud is not encrypted, it should be anonymized. Doing this correctly is difficult, and there are many ways to de-anonymize data. So choosing the right method to anonymize for your specific use case is really paramount. Data loss prevention basically boils down to actively monitoring data egress and alerting when anomalies in data transfers are detected. There's also simple measures such as access control, which can be a great help in keeping data where it's supposed to be. Security information event management is also an important aspect and represents what is commonly known as a security operations center, where security events and alerts are analyzed and responded to. This can in itself be an incredibly expensive undertaking, and it should be clearly understood if this is something that is required, and if yes, if it should be outsourced or done in-house. One important consideration for IT risk management is availability. Here some aspects of the cloud really shine, as availability is one of the major security topics that can easily be outsourced. But with all the benefits that come with outsourcing responsibility for availability, there's also a negative side, and that is that you have to absolutely trust in the cloud service provider to actually provide this availability. Even some of the major players such as Amazon have had regional outages where services were in the dark for hours or even days due to issues that occurred in, for example, load balancing or because of natural disasters. Due to the importance of availability, it again really pays to have an effective business continuity management and disaster recovery in place. For highly critical operations, it even pays to have redundancy by, for example, having a backup cloud provider in place that can quickly take over the operations for these critical functions. Especially when we go into Industry 4.0, sensors, transport, etc., outages or system failures can lead to dramatic health and safety issues, or even to major accidents with injury or loss of life. For these kind of operations, a business continuity plan is absolutely necessary, even if the systems are running in the cloud. And I know that I mentioned earlier that no plan will hold up to reality, but going into a crisis without a plan is also not recommended. One of the ways to make plans more effective is to practice. Business continuity testing allows the leadership and the team to get hands-on experience on how to deal with crises without actually going through a crisis. This way, when you do eventually have to respond to one, everyone knows the role, the team works well together, the technology has been tried and tested, and everything runs smoothly. Tying into business continuity management, resilience is another important topic. Resilience means you're able to respond to a potential crisis and deal with it in such a way that it doesn't materialize, and that the crisis can be avoided entirely. So how do you do that? Well, for one, you have to have everything in place I talked about in the last slide. That's not enough to be resilient. That's just responding to a crisis. To avert a crisis, your organization should be set up for it, and the skills, processes, and technologies should be in place to allow you to do so. This means an effective incident management should be in place, where you monitor events and alerts on a continuous basis and catch any problems before they become big problems. To be able to do that, however, you need to know what is going on within your IT systems. And for that, you need data, which we will get through logging. You can only monitor what you can see, so a best practice is to set up a centralized logging server combined with a monitoring tool and to feed the logging server with logs from all of your systems, including operating systems, applications, network traffic, sensors, and any other critical systems. Then, create alerting rules based on your risk assessment of these assets. So, summing up a lot of the risk mitigation measures, we can get into cloud data management. While not all risk has to do with data, a majority of priority risks will be reliant on having a firm grip on the cloud data lifecycle, which can be summed up as creating data, storing it, using it, sharing it, archiving it, and finally, destroying it. The first step in securing all this data is to know how you need to protect each piece of information, and that is done through data classification. Based on this, you can then apply the correct security measures. How you store your data is also a very important aspect of security. Do you need to encrypt the data at rest? Does the data need to arrive at an ultra-high frequency? Do you need to severely limit access to the data, or can it be available to many users? Security. Do you need to encrypt the data at rest? Does the data need to arrive at an ultra-high frequency? Do you need to severely limit access to the data, or can it be available to many users and systems? Here, choosing the correct storage architecture for your data is very important. And as I can see that I'm running out of time, I will jump right to the next slide. Now that I have talked about how you should go about securing your cloud, I'll talk a bit about what can happen when mistakes are made. The Capital One hack is one of the most famous cloud security breaches of all time. To sum up what happened here is that Capital One lost control of massive amounts of customer data, including names, addresses, credit scores, and payment histories. As you can imagine, this is quite uncomfortable for the clients, and this has had some major repercussions for the company. The way hackers were able to gain access to the data was that they used something called a server-side request forgery attack to generate an access token and trick the system into allowing them access into the data storage, in this case into an AWS S3 encrypted storage container. Since the system thought the access was legitimate, it even decrypted the data for the attackers before sending it to them. What led to this attack was that the architects and the developers misunderstood how to correctly configure the web access firewall, and the cloud service providers, in this case Amazon, did not provide sufficient support to the developers to ensure the implementation was secure. The responsibility in this case was with Capital One and not the cloud service provider. The system was running in a virtual private cloud administered by Capital One. There were several ways to avoid this, had the risk been accurately assessed and measures correctly implemented. For one, the web access firewall was misconfigured, allowing server-side request forgery to be executed. Correct configuration can sometimes be difficult, so Capital One should have ensured that the responsible developers had the skills and knowledge to do this. At the same time, the cloud service provider should have made all the required information easily accessible, so that the team could have gotten all the information they needed directly from the provider. Two, the principle of least privilege could have been applied for access to the data. While this would not have stopped the access to the EC2 server where the access token was generated, it would have made it difficult, or almost impossible, to generate a token that would grant full access to the data. This is one of the reasons the concept of defense in depth is so important in security. The good news is that a lot of what led to the specific breach has now been fixed. Cloud service providers have become much better at documenting their systems, which helps the users configure the system correctly. On the other side, correct application of the least privilege principle and the mapping of complex cloud architectures is in the hands of the cloud users. So each user is responsible for this independently of progress made by the cloud service providers. So that is the end of my part. Hopefully all of you thought the topic is as interesting as I think it is. And with that, I hand over to my colleague, Richard. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Nicholas. How many times have you heard it said, it's okay, it's in the cloud? But this cloud provider was taken offline recently by a serious fire that impacted web hosting, email and cloud services across Europe. Hence, when selecting a cloud provider, redundancy across multiple data centers has to be a key consideration, in addition to the requirements for the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your data. One consideration regarding the selection of cloud providers is whether they hold 27017 and 27018 certifications, by which they can demonstrate compliance with the applicable requirements for data security and data privacy in the cloud. 27001 is the baseline requirement to which the following two standards can be added. That's 27017 for cloud security and 27018 for cloud privacy. 27017 provides additional controls to address security issues specific to cloud operations that may not otherwise be addressed in service level and contractual agreements. A subset of these 27017 controls are applicable to either cloud service providers, or CSPs, or cloud service customers, CSCs, or possibly to both CSP and CSCs in some cases. CSPs, which process personally identifiable information, that's PII or PI, under contract to their customers, need to operate their services in ways that allow both parties to meet their legal and regulatory data protection requirements. 27018 enables a CSP to demonstrate to its customers that its cloud services are reliable, capable of being compliant to applicable regulations and contractual requirements, and have adopted industry best practice. 27017 addresses cloud-specific risks, which include the location of the data servers, along with the applicable legal jurisdictions, which are important considerations as they impact data retention and cloud architecture. For multi-tenancy environments, isolation of CSC data and the responsibility for managing configuration, administration, and operational tasks must be clearly defined. The administration of virtual environments must be defined to clearly identify responsibilities of the CSC and the CSP. Data ownership must also be clearly documented to ensure the CSP doesn't share cloud data with other service providers for data analytics purposes. And on cloud service termination, responsibility must be clearly defined regarding whether the cloud data can all be retrieved by the CSC or whether it has to be completely removed by the CSP. So 27017 provides guidance on additional controls that are applicable to the use and provision of cloud services by providing additional implementation guidance for the relevant controls already specified in 27002, and additional controls with implementation guidance that specifically relate to cloud services. 27017, as already mentioned, requires an organization to also already hold 27001 certification. The scope of 27017 should be within or aligned with the 27001 scope, as this diagram illustrates. 27017 certificates should also reference the Certified Cloud Service Model, that's IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS, applicable to the 27017 certification. In terms of the certificates issued, it can either consist of one 27001 certificate to which an additional set of controls from 27017 have been added, and that will therefore be incorporated onto the accredited 27001 certificate. Or you can have two certificates issued, one for each standard, with a separate unaccredited 27017 certificate, and the unaccredited certificate must reference the applicable 27001 certificate number within the 27017 scope of certification, and this is just a reflection back to the baseline 27001 certificate that the organisation holds. So 27017 provides this guidance for implementation of information security controls for CSCs and CSPs. Some controls are applicable to CSCs, others are applicable for CSPs. Selection of the appropriate controls and any applicable implementation guide provided is dependent on the CSCs or CSPs risk assessments and on any legal, contractual, regulatory or other cloud sector specific information security requirements. But often CSCs do have a responsibility for securing their own data when stored in the cloud, and as Nicholas alluded to, sometimes things go wrong. Another example, using Amazon Web Services product called S3 buckets for storage, the customers have responsibility for authentication and also for encryption of their data. A recent survey by Bitdefender identified that approximately 7% of all S3 servers were found to be completely publicly accessible without any authentication, and 35% were found that the data was unencrypted. And some of the worst offenders were also some of the best known, such as Verizon Wireless, Time Warner Cable, Accenture, and even the Pentagon. This slide demonstrates that 27017 can be applicable to a CSC, a CSP, or both a CSC and a CSP. In the case of Dropbox, it can be acting as a CSP to its end users, but if it runs on Google Cloud, so it is itself a CSC to Google. Such organizations would need to consider implementing all of the 27017 controls both as a CSP and as a CSC. So the controls applicable to 27017 certification include all those from 27001 and 27002, plus in addition 27017 provides additional guidance for 36 of those 27002 controls, plus an additional 7 cloud security controls from the extended control set. The 27017 controls can be added to the 27001 statement of applicability, and where controls are not selected, justification must be provided for omission of these controls, and that must be documented. The next 4 slides show the controls that are applicable for 27017. The controls shown in green font are those additional controls that are specific to a cloud security environment. The controls on the right-hand side in black font show the additional guidance provided through 27017 to the existing 27002 controls. Where they're applicable to both CSCs and CSPs, they are shown in either green or black font down the right-hand side. If they're only applicable to one of those groups, then a blue CSC or a red CSP will be displayed. On this first slide, there are 3 of those additional controls specific to a cloud security environment. That's 631, 815, and 822. On this slide, 3 of those controls are applicable only to CSPs indicated by the red CSP, and 1 of the controls is applicable to CSCs indicated by the blue CSC. In A9 access control, there are also 2 additional controls specific to the cloud environment. That's A951 and A952. Here there are 3 more of the cloud-specific controls, A1215, A1245, and A1314. And then the last set of controls for which 27017 provides additional guidance relating to security in the cloud. That's it for 27017, but there are additional takeaways on the Resources tab and also on the last slide. So stay tuned. We're now going to talk about 27018 for the protection of PI in public cloud acting as PI processors. CSPs which process personally identifiable information under contract to their CSCs need to operate their services in ways that allow both parties to meet their legal and regulatory data protection requirements. In a SaaS environment, e.g. Office 365, the data may belong to the SaaS provider's customers or even their customers' customers. The obligations falling on a PI processor for data collection, usage, transfer, and or disposal varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, which makes it even more challenging for cloud computing services operating globally. Hence, the benefit of additional controls provided by 27018, which provides additional guidance applicable to 15 of the 27002 controls already operated by an organization with 27001. And there are also 25 additional controls to address PI protection requirements that are not currently addressed by the existing 27002 controls. This is an overview of the 27002 controls for which 27018 provides additional guidance. And so these 15 additional guidance provided for the following controls: A511, 611, 722, 92 and 921, 1011, 1127, 4 of the controls in A12, 1321, 16.1 and 16.11, and 18.21. In addition, there are 25 additional controls in Annex A, and that's what we're going to look at next. So 27018 Annex A contains the extended control set for PI protection. There are 25 controls, and these additional controls include topics such as the secure erasure of temporary files and the handling of PI disclosure notifications. So don't need to worry about A1, that's just a general clause. A2 and A3 do apply, but not A4 and not A7, as there are no additional controls in those two. A5 and A6 also apply. A8 and A10 also apply, but not A9, as there are no additional controls in A9. Now to finish off, we'll look at A11 and also A12 on the next slide because these are the two largest control sets. So A11 covers the information security controls, such as appropriate NDAs and logging of information. It also covers topics like unencrypted storage media and disposal of hard copy materials. A12 is for privacy compliance and covers topics like geographical location of the PI, whether it's crossing borders between jurisdictions, and the intended destination. Now, as mentioned, SGS has developed some resources to help you with these certifications for your unaccredited certificates. These consist of boilerplate templates for 27017 and 27018. These templates document generic responses in black font down the right-hand side for each of the applicable clauses for these two standards. Subsections shown in red font have to be updated with client-specific details. If required, clients can undertake a self-assessment by completing these checklists in advance of the certification audit. This can assist with the certification process by identifying all the information required for the assessment, whilst at the same time also saving time and reducing the cost of the certification audit. If you'd like to try such a self-assessment using the SGS checklists, please email me at richard.skipsey@sgs.com for further details. My email address is also shown on the last page of this presentation. And the last slide shows some of the training courses that are available via the SGS Academy. These include Introduction and Awareness courses, Internal Audit courses, and Lead Auditor training courses. For details on all of the SGS Academy training courses, please see the sgs.com website address.